Hey everyone, my name's Ali and I use they, them pronouns. I want to thank you for being here at NOREP Michigan's second teach-in. The content that you're going to see today is brought to you by Legal Services of South Central Michigan, Detroit Renter City, Greater Kalamazoo Renters Union, Lansing Tenants Union, Ann Arbor Tenants Union, and Moratorium Now. All these folks have been doing housing justice work throughout the state, and they wanted to put all of their resources together for tenants to know what an illegal eviction looks like, for tenants to know what their rights are at this moment, and also for housing justice organizers to have an idea of what sort of work might be effective in their individual cities. So you might hear a little bit about how to do an eviction hotline and some tactics for how to stop evictions in the first place. There'll be some history in there. There'll be some specific stories of how people got through specific cases, and we hope that all of this together will be helpful. Make sure you look out. At the end of each segment, the organizers will be plugging all of their contact information, and that way you can ask specific questions, make sure that you apply to the things that they were talking about, and you can just send us quick emails and we'll try to get back to everyone. We know this video isn't live, so we couldn't have a question and answer section, so we hope that this is accessible to everyone. If you realize that this is not, please let us know in some other way that you need help understanding part of the teach-in. Anyways, thanks, and I'll leave it to them.
Hi folks, my name is Callie Dendrinos and I'm a staff attorney at Legal Services of South Central Michigan, which is a nonprofit law firm in Ypsilanti. I'm here today to talk about evictions and the eviction process really quickly. I'm not giving any legal advice, but I am trying to provide you with some legal information. I do want to say, though, that with COVID-19, things have been changing really quickly. So if you have any questions, always good to check with local agencies, local courts, to make sure you're clear on your local court's process, too. So, okay, with that being said, what is an eviction? An eviction is a set-out. It's a set-out usually by a landlord ordering a tenant to leave. But in Michigan, the only person who can decide whether someone should be evicted or not is a judge, not a landlord. So all your landlord can do is start the process and get to court and ask the judge for an order evicting you, but they can't actually do it themselves. And if they are doing it, that's illegal. So, okay, evictions should only be ordered by judges. How does a landlord start the process? They start by serving their tenant with a notice. Usually it's a 7-day notice for non-payment of rent, if that's the issue. Sometimes it might be a 30-day notice for some other lease violation. Maybe the landlord thinks the tenant is smoking in a non-smoking unit or having too many loud parties or something like that. So again, 7-day notice is pretty common. That's for non-payment. And then you might have a 30-day notice for some other lease violation. And that time frame, the 7 days or the 30 days, is usually the amount of time that you have to fix the problem. So 7 days to come up with the rent. Now, after that time has expired, if a tenant doesn't leave, then a landlord has to take the next step, which is to go to court and file an eviction case. Now, there's 2 pieces of paper you'll probably get if a landlord has filed an eviction case against you. Number 1, the complaint. And the complaint is the document that the landlord files with the court that tells the court what it is that the landlord wants. Do they want possession? Do they want the keys back? Probably. It's an eviction case. But maybe they're also asking for a money judgment. Landlords can do both in the same case, and you'll know if your landlord is asking for a money judgment because there's a little section at the very bottom. If you look at the bottom of the complaint, there's a little section that's called a supplemental complaint. And if that information is filled out, that means your landlord is seeking both possession back and also money. So the other thing that you might get from the court is the summons, because the court has to set a hearing to decide on whether or not the landlord should win. And so the summons literally is summoning you to court, telling you, hey, tenant, this landlord has filed the case. Come to court and let's talk about it. The summons is really important, even though it looks like mostly legalese, and honestly some of it is. But the important part is about halfway down, there's a section that tells you when your court date is and at what time. I really want to emphasize that because you wouldn't believe how many people just don't go to court. And what that means is that the landlord wins automatically. They get what's called a default judgment. So it's important to pay attention to the summons. After you get that information, in most courts in Michigan, you just need to go to court that day, the date of your hearing, so that you can get involved in the process. But I do need to note that there are some counties, some district courts in Michigan, where that's not true, where what you need to do is actually file something in writing. Now, those are the courts around East Tawas and West Branch. There are some courts on the western side of the UP, Iron and Dickinson counties. And then on the south side of the state, it's Monroe, Jackson, and Lenawee counties. So if you live in one of those counties or in the city of Westland, in those places, you may be required to file a written answer first, something in writing saying why you disagree. If you have any questions about that, I strongly encourage you to check with your local court and maybe also check out michiganlegalhelp.org, michiganlegalhelp.org, which is a really useful website and has sample pleadings on it, including a sample answer. But like I said, for most people in Michigan, they don't have to do anything in writing as tenants. They just need to show up to court. And when you get to court, you can expect usually a landlord's lawyer to be there and wanting to negotiate with you. Maybe you don't like their terms, but they may try to get a settlement agreement from you first, so they don't have to go through a whole court hearing. And you're totally able to negotiate with the landlord or with their lawyer. You don't have to agree to everything they say. If you can work it out, then you'll only need to go into court to tell the judge what you've decided. If you can't work it out, then the case will be more complicated. The court will want to hear from both sides. What do they say? What do you say? And that's when it's going to be really important to think about proof. So I should back up and say, what kind of proof would you want to bring to court? Well, any defense that you have, anything to support a defense. And when I say a defense, I mean any reason why you shouldn't be evicted. So let's say your landlord is evicting you for non-payment, but actually you don't owe that money because you've already paid. Well, great. If you've got the money order receipt, bring it to court. Or maybe there's really bad conditions in your house and your furnace hasn't worked or your stove hasn't worked for months. Those are things that you want to bring proof of, whatever you have, to court. Maybe those are text messages or letters or inspection reports, photographs. Those can all be useful pieces of evidence that the judge can consider when they're deciding whether or not you really should have to repay all of that rent or not. I think it's also worth mentioning that right now, because of the pandemic, some courts are automatically granting everybody a 1-week adjournment, we call it. That's legalese, I know, but an adjournment just means rescheduling. They're rescheduling the cases. You can also always ask for that at your first hearing. You can say, I would like an adjournment. And the idea is then you have a chance to go and try to talk to a lawyer, maybe a private law firm or a nonprofit like mine. So after you have your hearing, the court will make a decision. They'll issue what's called a judgment. And that's legalese, but it just means a court's decision. If you win, the judgment will say that the case is dismissed. Great, you're done. If you lose, then the judgment will say usually that you have 10 days to leave. If it's a non-payment case, it will say you have 10 days to pay or leave. So that means, let's say you owe $1,000. And the court does its math, and decides that you owe $1,000 and $1,150 because of the court costs. So then you'll have 10 days to either pay that amount of money or to move out. Now, I want to be clear that even at the end of that time period, your landlord still can't automatically set you out. They have to go back to court again and file what's called an application for a writ of restitution, which I know is more legalese, but all that means is a request for an eviction order. That's it. So your landlord will have to go to court again after those days have expired and ask for that. And then the judge will have to sign that. And that's what your landlord can use to ask a local company or maybe your sheriff's office to come and supervise a set out. In Washtenaw County, my clients know that's happening because there's a 24-hour notice posted on the door. And I say all that to say there's a lot of steps in that process. So first, your landlord has to give you a notice. Then you have to go to court. Then the 10 days have to expire. Then your landlord has to file an application for the writ of restitution, which means the eviction order. And only then are we talking about an actual eviction case. An actual eviction, where you're physically being told you have to leave and the landlord is allowed to change the locks. So I hope that was helpful. I know that was really fast. Again, my name is Callie Dendrinos. I'm a staff attorney at Legal Services of South Central Michigan. And I think if you have any more questions, a good place to start would be michiganlegalhelp.org. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Rachel Baker, and I'm in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm one of the co-organizers of a group of housing activists and advocates. We center our organizing around anti-racist and feminist values, and our organization is called Detroit Renter City. We want to make sure that everyone that lives in Detroit, but especially Black Detroiters, do not face eviction or exploitation or any kind of displacement as we see rapid changes and developments throughout Detroit's neighborhoods. Today I'm going to talk to you about habitability issues, so the conditions that you live in as a renter, as well as the new statewide eviction diversion program, the EDP. So I'm going to start with the eviction diversion program. As part of a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, across the state of Michigan on March 20th, the governor announced the beginning of something called an eviction moratorium. So that means that no one was able to be evicted throughout the stay-at-home orders or up until any time before July 15th, which is when the statewide eviction moratorium ended. For those people watching this who are in Detroit, Detroit has an extension on the eviction moratorium that lasts until August 15th. But what the governor's office produced in preparation for the end of the statewide moratorium was something called the Eviction Diversion Program. And the Eviction Diversion Program is a form of rental assistance, so funding to help landlords and tenants resolve any unpaid or back owed rent. So for tenants who have been unable to make rental payments anytime from March of 2020 until the end of July of 2020, the eviction diversion program is to assist your landlord with any lost income that they have missed. So rental payments will not be going into the hands of tenants, which would be a more empowering situation. These payments will be made out to landlords. However, if you would like to access the eviction diversion program, it is the responsibility of the tenant to take on that work. So what you'll need to do as a tenant, if you owe back owed rent, is seek out the organization in your city that is facilitating the eviction diversion program. It's most likely going to be a legal aid organization or a local housing organization, and you can go on to the State of Michigan website to look up what organization it is in your particular city or county that is administrating the eviction diversion program. So I'm located in Detroit, and in Detroit, people can access Lakeshore Legal Aid, which can be reached at 313-242-0811. So if you're a tenant and you want to access the eviction diversion program, here are some important things to know. You have to have back owed rent that is from March, April, May, June, July, or August of 2020. You're only allowed to access the eviction diversion rental assistance program one time. Currently, that's the current rule. We're not quite sure what will happen if people across Michigan continue to have higher rates of unemployment and lost income, but currently tenants are allowed to access the program one time. And in order to access the program, you need to provide some forms of identification and proof of income. So when you find your local agency that is facilitating the program and you contact them and book an appointment to meet with one of their counselors, you will need to bring with you a piece of identification. Photo ID is always preferable. You also need proof of your address. So if your ID has your current address on it, the address that you live at, that's fine. However, if your ID has a different address on it, you'll need to bring something like a internet bill or a heating bill with you that has your current address on it, the address that you live at. So that will be your proof of your address. You also need proof of income, so pay stubs count, and people who have transfer payments from Social Security. You can bring your Social Security stub, and you can also bring any unemployment payments and pandemic unemployment payment proof with you. And you need 1 month worth of proof of income. So approximately 4 weeks if you're someone that is receiving transfer payments either from the federal government or the state government. So the eviction diversion program will conduct itself like this. If you receive something called a notice to quit, which is a court document, you will contact your local service organization and tell them that you've received a notice to quit and that you would like to apply for the eviction diversion program. Keep in mind that a notice to quit is not an eviction order. You do not need to leave your rental unit if you receive a notice to quit because you are always entitled to a day in court first. And in the case of the eviction diversion program, you're entitled to apply to this program before your landlord can evict you. So you'll contact the service organization, let them know that you would like to fill out an application, and bring your forms of identification either with you or have them ready for a video interview. If you're eligible, the organization will reach out to your landlord and make sure that they get to fill out the landlord component of the application as well. And the legal aid counselor or the housing counselor will walk you through a settlement agreement. And once the settlement is made, the landlord will receive a transfer payment within approximately 2 weeks of that appointment happening. Now, if you receive a court summons, what you'll do is contact that local housing organization or legal aid organization. You'll let them know that you've received a court summons, and the process will be very similar. You will say that you'd like to apply for the eviction diversion program. They will help you fill out your EDP tenant application. They'll also help you contact your landlord to have the landlord fill out their part of the application. And then something called a conditional dismissal will be completed between yourself and the landlord, and then it will be filed with the court. Your landlord, again, within 2 weeks will receive a payment after that conditional dismissal is made. So once again, when you do receive a notice to quit, if you do, or a court summons, that is not grounds to have your landlord remove you from your unit or to have them change your locks or take any of your possessions out of your unit. That's not allowed, and if that happens, make sure that you contact legal aid. So the second thing I wanted to review is habitability issues. So if you are a tenant who is anticipating being evicted, one thing to keep in mind is that when you do go to court for your hearing date, it's important to make sure that you have any issues that you experience in your rental unit recorded. So if you experience any issues with heat or access to water or electricity, faulty wiring, or any kind of structural failure, as well as issues like major mold or lead in your unit, you should make sure that those items are documented by photographing them and writing down the issue. What you'll do next is make sure you tell your landlord that you're having whatever kind of issue it is you're having in your unit, especially if it's something like sewage. Make sure that you date the written complaint that you've made to your landlord. It can be sent through a text message or it can be sent through email. But make sure that you have the date recorded and keep a record of the complaint that you've issued to them. The next thing you'll do locally is contact a authority in your city. In Detroit, we use the Building Safety, Engineering, and Environment Department, sometimes called BSEED. Through an online application, tenants can make an official complaint to BSEED in Detroit. And that will be an identical complaint to the one that you've made to your landlord. What will happen next usually is an inspector will be sent to your property to look at the issue. So if you're in Ann Arbor, that complaint is going to go through the Building, Rental, and Inspection Services Department of the City of Ann Arbor. If you're in Grand Rapids, you will simply use the Services tab on the City of Grand Rapids website and complete something called the Report of Complaint, which is also an online form. And if you're in Kalamazoo, you're going to go through the Community Planning and Economic Development Department through an online application to request that a rental inspector come to your property. So at that point, you have complained to the landlord in writing and kept the date of that communication. You will also have issued an official complaint to your local city building inspection authority. And of course, that will be dated within their records, but you should keep a record of that communication for yourself as well. And what you're allowed to begin doing 30 days after you have made the request to your landlord for them to make a repair is, if they have not initiated a repair, they've not resolved the problem you're having, you can begin withholding your rent. So what you'll do is contact your local bank or credit union or a housing authority. In Detroit, the United Community Housing Coalition provides this service. And the service you're looking for is called an escrow account. So through your bank or credit union or housing authority, 30 days after your landlord has not fixed an issue you're having, you're allowed to begin withholding your rent in an escrow account. Now, if your landlord still has not fixed the issue after 60 days and you have withheld, that's 2 months worth of rent. 60 days after a official complaint has been made to the landlord and you've complained to the local building authority, that 60 days worth of rent actually gets kicked back down to the tenant and you get to keep that rent. So the idea with complaining about habitability issues or issues of condition in your rental unit is to show up to an eviction court date that you may have with evidence that although you have not been able to pay rent, your landlord is also not holding up their end of the deal of providing you with a safe place to live that's properly maintained. If at any point, regardless of whether or not you are on the verge of eviction or if you have been paying your rent regularly, you can always take issues of habitability, meaning the conditions of your unit, to your landlord as a complaint and to a local building authority to make sure that you get to live in housing that is safe, warm, and has access to the kinds of utilities that you need. Something to keep in mind if you're a tenant is that if you make a complaint to your landlord about the conditions of your unit, they are not allowed to evict you for having made the complaint, and they are not allowed to raise your rent as a result either. Those are considered forms of retaliation. And if you experience that as a tenant, it's important to take any communication about that you've received from your landlord to local legal aid or your local housing authority. So I reviewed the eviction diversion program with you, and I also went over issues of habitability and rental conditions. If anyone in Detroit or statewide would like to reach the Detroit Renter City group that I'm proudly part of, we are on Instagram at Detroit Renter City. We can also be found on Facebook under the same name, Detroit Renter City. Our website is detroitrentercity.com, and we can be reached through email at detroitrentercity@gmail.com. And again, my name is Rachel Baker, and I know that all of us are going to be able to fight together to make sure that as few people as possible experience eviction in Michigan now and in the future.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel Kraus, and I'm an organizer. I'm going to relate an experience that I had when I was organizing with Greater Kalamazoo Renters Union and how we were able to thwart a landlord trying to process an illegal eviction. Back in April, during the eviction moratorium that the governor of Michigan had put into place, a landlord had attempted to process an illegal eviction. They had given a tenant a letter of demanding possession of the unit. Now, at the time, this was illegal because while the executive order allowed landlords to ask for payment of rent, they couldn't ask for demand possession of the rental unit. This was in directly contradiction to that. So prima facie, the eviction attempt was illegal. Now, had it gone any further, if this landlord had tried to go through the courts would have said, stop, hey, can't be doing that right now. But that wasn't what the landlord's goal was. The landlord's goal was to try to get the tenant to what's called self-evict, basically accept what the landlord is saying is truth, law, and what that tenant has to do, and just up and leave, despite the fact that there's no legal reason for them to leave. The only people that can make you leave and evict you are the bailiffs of the court after that process has gone through. So what this was an attempt at an illegal eviction. This tenant reached out to Greater Kalamazoo Renters Union, and the members of Greater Kalamazoo Renters, myself and some others, had what's called a one-on-one, in which we met with the tenant. This was COVID, so it was like a Zoom meeting or something. And we went over the history of what was going on in this tenant's residency, the history of like why this conflict was happening. In this instance, it was because the tenant was a theater worker at a movie theater, in which, of course, during the COVID crisis, which is still ongoing, but at that moment they were closed. You couldn't have them opened. So there was no job. There's no income coming in, and the tenant was applying for unemployment assistance, and it just hasn't come yet. The system's overtaxed. It takes a while. That wasn't quick enough for the landlord. The landlord was making comments of like, "Oh, you should just go get a different job." It's not really doable in the middle of a crisis like that. So the landlord did the letter of demanding possession to try to just get the tenant out to get somebody else in that would pay their bills. So we went over the history of that, and we educated the tenant on what the do's and don'ts were of the eviction process, and explained that this is in fact an illegal eviction. This tenant essentially has to do nothing right now other than maintain a paper trail and continue to try to work on getting the unemployment assistance that was owed to them. And so our goal at that moment was just delay until that stream of income hit back in, and then there was no cause for the tenant to be evicted. During these one-on-ones, we went over what is known in labor circles as AEIOU: agitate, educate, inoculate, organize, and unionize or push, depending on who you talk to. We worked with the tenant on this so we could organize them in the same manner we would like a labor shop, because our ultimate goal here was organizing tenants in the building this tenant was in into the larger cohesive tenants union, a form of solidarity. So the first step is agitation. Agitation is when people are unwilling to accept a situation that's negative, there's a problem, and they're becoming agitated. They want to do something about it. In this case, the agitation was already there, i.e. the illegal eviction attempt, the attempt to get the tenant to self-evict. The agitation was already there. Our next step is education. And education is when we're trying to gain information about what actions to take, how those actions are taken, what those actions even are. And that was kind of the meat and potatoes of the one-on-one calls. We went over the education of like legal versus illegal evictions, methods to combat this, resources if it went down to trial, like West Michigan Legal Aid, all down the line. The next step is inoculate. And inoculation, much like in medicine, is a step in which we want to safeguard yourself against like reprisals. In medicine, it's like the inoculate again with a vaccine against something like COVID, maybe. So we want to safeguard ourselves against future reprisals. So we prepare people that are agitated, people that are educated. We kind of say, well, you know, not everything's going to go smooth. The landlord or the boss could do this to you. In this case, it's the boss because it's an organizing situation. It's a landlord. So the landlord could mess with you. The landlord could do illegal things, or they could do legal things. They could start claiming that, oh, you're a problem to the other landlords, or oh, you're building, you're destroying the property in some manner. So we wanted to prepare the tenant for anything like that can happen, because the first step in avoiding a trap is knowing that there's a trap there in the first place. So that was again accomplished during these one-on-one calls where we inoculated the tenants, being like, hey, it could go bad in these scenarios, and this is what we need to do to prevent that or respond to that. The next step in AEIOU is organize, and that step is once you have a desired action, what you want to do, once you've been agitating, once you've been educated, once you've been inoculating this, you want to organize not only just yourself or a few people, you want to organize the entire unit. In this case, was a rental building. It was a formerly single-family house that was then broken up into 3 units because Kalamazoo, Michigan is in fact a college town, so a lot of these properties are popular and they're all over, mostly for students, but also for families or single people or what have you. They're just all over. And so doing this, we had asked the tenant to start building out relationships with other people in their building, try to say, what problems have you been having, kind of have this tenant agitate the other tenants, figuring out what their issues are with the landlord or with the building, and build that into an organization of joining the Greater Kalamazoo Renters Union. The tenant did this. They reached out and they built a level of solidarity with the other 2 tenants in their building. So now we went from one tenant being threatened with an illegal eviction to 3 tenants now in a tenants union who are all educated in knowing their rights and knowing how to combat things like this, and now are watchful for next this happens. So the final step on this is union or push. And what that means is once you've educated, once you've inoculated, once you've organized what you're going to be, that's the state of where you can project your power that you've built. And there is power in organization. There is power in having 3 tenants in a building who represent 100% of the tenants in that building, all working together with a single voice. That's actual power. And you need to demonstrate that power and build off that power against the landlord who, as sometimes landlords are going to be in an adversarial role. And if they are going to be in an adversarial role, you need to have the strongest possible power base to push against that. And that is with unionizing yourselves, building yourselves into solidarity, having one cohesive goal where a landlord can't just pick you apart or tear you down person by person. You work together. So the landlord goes after one person, they're in fact going after all 3. And that's essentially what happened here with this step. So the tenant organized their entire building, all based on the fact that the landlord was attempting to process an illegal eviction against them. And so now the tenant in question has all their unemployment stuff is caught up to them, the system caught up to them. They're now working in a separate job, now that more jobs have been opening up. So now there's no cause for any of this. So that landlord went from threatening somebody who's down their luck to demonstrating and agitating that person, who then built solidarity with other people in their building. That's kind of why I kind of want to have this conversation. So you can organize people within your buildings, within your things, whether or not you share all the same landlord, maybe across different single-family homes, maybe your apartment complex. You can build power and you can build relationships with the people that you're living near, because that's ultimately the community that you're meant to take care of and protect and have protect you. So if you'd like to find out more of how you can do that sort of thing, and if you're in the Kalamazoo County area, you can contact Kalamazoo Renters Union on Facebook. Just search Kalamazoo Renters Union, and they'll be there on Facebook. You reach out there. You can also reach out on Gmail, greaterkzoo@gmail.com. And stick around and enjoy the next segment. It's going to be full of excellent teachings.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting us to this webinar. My name is Mike Shane. I'm with the Moratorium Now Coalition based in Southeast Michigan. We've been around for more than 12 years fighting foreclosures, evictions, utility shutoffs, and numerous other things. We support anti-war actions, anti-racist actions, and we also were involved in fighting the bankruptcy in Detroit. when we got started as Moratorium Now in 2008, we had been fighting evictions under the name of another coalition called the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice. In the course of doing that work, we started collaborating with State Senator Hanson Clark, along with some other people, and we got him to introduce a bill in the state legislature calling for an eviction moratorium based on work that was done in the 1930s by the working class movement all across the United States. Our intent was to get this law passed as we fought individual evictions on a case-by-case basis. Clearly, we didn't get that law didn't pass. It was introduced twice in the state house, or state senate, and once in the U.S. Congress. And even the Democrats really didn't embrace those bills. And it shows you what we're up against. Some of the things that we would do when we were fighting bank foreclosures, we would launch email campaigns, phone campaigns. We'd pack the court. And as a last resort, if we didn't win there, we would basically call for demonstrations at the home where the eviction was to take place. We had to do that a few times, but it's a tremendous amount of work because you've got to build up the coalition, you've got to find the people that want to do this, and hopefully mobilize 20 to 100 people or more to stop the eviction. In Detroit, we had a special advantage that was unique to Detroit. In 2007, Council member Joanne Watson introduced an ordinance in the city of Detroit that mandated that a clean dumpster be used to store the victim's belongings. And this dumpster had to have a side entrance that was securable with a padlock by the family that just got evicted. This was happening because for several years, evictions were going on in Detroit. This is like 2005, 2006 timeframe. And once your belongings are put on the street, it's a free-for-all. People just drive by and start taking your stuff. We accidentally realized that this gave us a handle on evictions. In 2009, when we were trying to stop the eviction of Anthony King, we were in front of his house, and one of us, actually a couple of us, said, what would happen if we moved the dumpster? Lo and behold, a pickup truck was found, and we moved the dumpster to another city block. When the bailiff showed up, we called them Blackwater bailiffs back then because so many bailiffs were needed to deal with the evictions that they appointed contractors who used vehicles that had no licenses. You'd think we were in Iraq or something when these people showed up. What we were able to do, though, when we moved the dumpster, because it was a city ordinance that required the use of a dumpster in the eviction, it stopped it. But it only stopped it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, the dumpster came, but this time the bailiff arrived with it. The bailiff also has a gun. And he also arrived with the crew that was going to do the eviction. So in that instance, we were not able to stop the eviction. In fact, that eviction was featured in Michael Moore's documentary, Capitalism, A Love Story, which documented the eviction crisis around the United States and the ripoffs by Wall Street in terms of mortgage-backed securities and an acronym of all kinds of financial instruments that led to the crash in 2008. So Anthony ultimately lost his house, but after the bailiff left, we moved him back in. And while we were in the basement, a couple of the people, there were 4 of us that went in the basement. Our goal was to turn the water back on, to turn the gas back on, and with the intent of having him live there going forward. As we turned the water on, someone started swearing that the bank's people had broken the water pipes. And then we found out when the gas was turned on that the gas line was also broken, and fortunately we didn't blow ourselves up. Because, like I said, a couple of people were smoking in the basement. Since then, this tactic of messing with the dumpster has been employed on several occasions. And the last time in Detroit, I believe around 2014 or 2015, I might have the date wrong, that did not end well. The police showed up in force and the eviction proceeded. And we actually had one of the activists end up with a broken leg. Today, the number of evictions that we face exceed the total number of evictions that occurred during the banking crisis. Think about that. 10 to 12 people, 12 million people faced evictions, and we were able to stop a few one at a time. It's a massive amount of work. Each time, though, that we approached a foreclosure and an eviction, we raised the political demand that there must be a moratorium on the evictions, and we showed a way to do it using the methods and the laws that were instituted by our ancestors in the 1930s. 27 states had moratorium on evictions, and it was a result of at least 5 years of struggle by the unemployed councils that were organized mainly by the Communist Party USA. And when they fought evictions, they literally, in the apartments, used their fists to fight against the sheriff, the police, and the bailiffs. And back in that time, we were pretty much even in terms of our armaments, and the methods of resistance were comparable to the methods that the police used to attack people. Unfortunately, today we don't have that. But briefly, that's what we did. We went after the banks. We had lawyers go into court. We packed the court. We ultimately then set up pickets at the homes where people were going to be evicted. Today, we face something that I can't imagine how it's going to work. How can you evict millions of people over the course of a few months and evict them while violating their constitutional due process rights to a trial? The evictions look like they're going to be done by Zoom, which is a clear violation of the U.S. Constitution and your right to a fair trial and a right to not have your property seized without an appropriate hearing. That being said, this is where we are today. We still might be able to try those tactics, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of organizing. So in the view of moratorium now, we have to also wage now a political struggle. So to that end, we're supporting, for example, the Detroit Eviction Defense's demonstration on Monday at the District Court in Detroit, 36th District Court, where we're going to demand that the moratorium in Detroit be extended and that proper trials, proper eviction hearings be conducted, and that means not by Zoom. Think about this. If you don't have money for rent, you probably don't have money for your internet connection, and you might not even have a smartphone anymore. So how the hell are you going to join a Zoom conference call? And we all know that these Zoom calls fail on a regular basis, and it could result in a homeowner or a renter losing everything they have. So I think these are a lot of things to think about. We've called for a demonstration against Whitmer on Wednesday, August 19th, I believe, at 1 o'clock at the Romney Building, which is at the intersection of Capitol and Michigan Avenue. That's the executive office building where Whitmer will be. We're going there because we want her to hear us. We're going to have a car caravan around the building, and we're going to bring sound system up there so we can scream and yell at her, demanding that the eviction moratorium be extended for at least a year or until the pandemic emergency is over. And that emergency was declared by international body, the WHO, and that's what we mean when we say until the pandemic's over. So I hope this was helpful. I am worried, though, that we will not be able to use the tactics that we used 10, 12 years ago because the crisis is so deep. But I commend all of you for getting together, put our heads together to try to figure out how this is done. And I hope you join us in Lansing on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. It's another attempt to get a eviction moratorium implemented. Some of our arguments are this: that program that she has for eviction diversion, whatever she calls it, is a major subsidy to big landlords and the banks, and we're opposed to it. We also know that some people are losing their or will face eviction because they haven't received their unemployment check yet. So how is Whitmer going to manage a eviction diversion program when they can't even get the unemployment right? In any case, that's about all I have to say. I hope this was helpful, and we'll continue to collaborate with you. That is the Moratorium Now Coalition. Will continue to collaborate with anyone and anybody that wants to stop this madness that's going forth in front of us. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the ground. Take care.
All right, hi. I'm Isabella from the Ann Arbor Tenants Union. Over the next few minutes, I will be talking about canvassing and flyering for eviction defense. As an example, I'll go over how the AATU went about their canvassing process. So going door to door speaking to residents is a really useful tool in that it provides a way to reach tenants directly and accessibly, which is really important, especially under the current circumstances. In AATU's case, we held a canvass which targeted areas at high risk of eviction. So canvassing was a way to reach out directly with anti-eviction resources to those that might find those resources most valuable. So in planning a canvass, AATU referred to a report published by the University of Michigan Poverty Solutions team. And that data was really helpful in practical ways, which I'll describe a little bit later on. But it also provided concrete statistics, which showed the gravity of Michigan renter situations, compounded now during the current eviction crisis. So in the Poverty Solutions report, it was noted that Michigan had a particularly high eviction filing rate, which is 1 eviction case filed for every 6 rental households. And that varies greatly by county as well. So that, combined with the lack of legal resources for tenants, makes it even more important that tenants know what their rights are. The stakes are really high, and canvassing is always a really important way to connect on the ground about those issues. So I would highly recommend checking out the Poverty Solutions report if you want to learn more. And you can find that paper by Googling Poverty Solutions Michigan's Eviction Crisis. So one of the first things that you'll probably be thinking about while planning a canvass is putting together a flyer. And the content of that flyer is going to depend on your intention. So if you're just trying to make contact with people, you'll want a strong headline, a brief explanation, and your contact info, of course. You can provide more info too, structured neatly so it's not overwhelming. And that could be a brochure-style flyer. So the flyer that we made was a How to Fight an Eviction brochure. And alongside our contact info, we added a list of the rights of tenants, a brief overview of how eviction courts work, how one might apply for rental assistance, and also how people might access free legal aid if they are either low income or a senior. All right, so as far as paperwork and staying organized goes, you'll definitely want to plan ahead on getting the flyers printed. Some places aren't open on weekends, etc. And you can also group the flyers to match the locations that you're planning on targeting, and group them by how many flyers you expect to use in each location. So a little more complicated is figuring out which areas to target in a canvass. In AATU's case, Washtenaw County's court dockets are all listed online, so we looked at the dockets of the courts, and most of those just list companies or private landlords as plaintiffs, but in some cases they list also the names of apartment complexes that are their own LLCs. So in our canvass, we prioritized going to those complexes because we knew that there were evictions already in progress there. To get some of our other locations, we also made a list of all the properties owned by a landlord that has a particular history of evictions. And then finally, we also use data to plan out where to canvass. So that's where the Poverty Solutions report came in. Thanks to the help of a Huron Valley DSA member, we pulled out info from that report with data grouped by census tract. And also, so again, you can find that website by Googling Poverty Solutions Michigan Evictions. Their website has some graphical tools that you can use to access population data, and it also allows for downloading as a CSV file, which you can upload as a spreadsheet for manipulation. And you can filter that data by county, which we did in order to get just the data for census tracts in Washtenaw County. So first we used the data gathered in the Poverty Solutions report to find Washtenaw County's rate of eviction filings per 100 households. And then next with data gathered from the American Community Survey conducted by the Census Bureau, we compared the number of renters in each census tract to the total number of housing units in tracts with high eviction filing rates in order to get a sense of which of these tracts might have large apartment complexes in them as opposed to being mostly single-family homes. And then, on a similar note, it's helpful to understand population density in a given area while planning a canvass, just for logistical purposes. So once census tracts with high eviction rates and large numbers of renters were identified, we then worked with people familiar with those parts of the county to figure out where those large complexes might be and which would be good to canvass. So if you don't have this data readily available to you, or if you're not sure that it would be easy to navigate the Poverty Solutions or census data, a good place to start can be simply building a list of large apartment complexes in your area where you might expect eviction rates to be high. If you're not certain where those complexes are, you might consider reaching out to different orgs in your area that work with people who might be at risk of eviction, and then you could ask if they're able to distribute your flyer. So for the actual canvassing process, we wouldn't recommend flyering or canvassing on your own, if only because having a partner or two can make the process safer and also more enjoyable. If you have a large number of people planning on flyering with you, you can take the time before going out to assign people into groups and then assign groups to specific buildings and locations. Once you know which locations you're planning on covering, you can do some research into those areas ahead of time. Like, for example, some complexes might not have a gate that will, might have a gate that will prevent cars from entering, but not people. And some might not be accessible to non-residents at all. So knowing things like that can help save time and energy before you go out. As far as putting the flyers places, you can't put them on the mailbox, so you will have to get creative. You could put it like in the door jamb or half under their doormat or tucked in somewhere else. Or even in the windshield wipers of cars in the parking lot if there is one. And then lastly, in the process of flyering, you will probably run into tenants, and that's a great opportunity to introduce yourself, your organization if you're a part of one, and explain what you're doing. And if they seem interested, you can offer them a flyer and your contact info, and if possible, you can try to get theirs so you can guarantee that you contact them again later. If you're working with a larger group, it can be helpful to prepare people for this interaction and practice it with each other so that you're familiar with the experience and prepared. Alright, so in conclusion, this video went over what it looks like to set up a canvas for eviction defense. Lastly, I would say please reach out to us. The Ann Arbor Tenants Union is organizing eviction defenses for tenants who want to fight for their homes. We have a tenant circle on Mondays from 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. And in Washtenaw County, that's the place to go with any questions that you might have about landlords, repairs, leases, tenants' rights, etc. And you can access the tenant circle at tinyurl.com/zoomtc. Also, reach out if you want to get involved and attend one of our regular meetings. You can get in touch. We have a Facebook, facebook.com/A2tenantsunion. Email aatenantunion, no s, @gmail.com. And then also a phone number that is 440-482-1968. And also we have an intake form which you can find on our Facebook or at tinyurl.com/intakegu if you have a particular issue that you'd like to get help with. All right, thank you. Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Ross Fisher. I am a member of the Lansing Tenants Union, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our eviction defense hotline that we've created, why we created it, a couple of the main features of the hotline, and a little bit of info on some of the things that we've seen so far. So, the purpose of the eviction defense hotline for us is really to keep people in their homes. And the hotline helps accomplish this by really making landlords aware that tenants have power numbers, and when they act in solidarity and they have all of their legal info that could help them in the process, they're going to be much more resilient and much stronger, much better able to stay in their homes. So we ended up creating about a month ago or so now. We started working on a setup where we got basically a prepaid cell phone, and we also set up the Remind app, which we use to help dispatch people to certain cases. So the phone's just really simple. We have a number for people to call. There's roughly 10 of us from the organization that have signed up to help man the phone. So on days when I've done it, I'll just have the phone for maybe 1 or 2 days and be responsible to answer any calls that we may get during that time. And we don't know exactly, what every call is going to look like. There's lots of different cases, and we may be more helpful in certain cases than others. So we have basically the phone comes with a binder to take down information for people who give us a call. And we have some resources we can direct them to if they're looking for something very specific, like Legal Services of South Central Michigan, or like Holy Cross has another number for eviction diversion stuff. So that's an example of a couple resources that we can give people. But we want to get as much information from them as possible on their situation and whether this is potentially a legal or illegal eviction, because we deal with both of those types of evictions. And so we haven't gotten a huge volume of calls so far, but we expect it to start growing. And to get the number out there, we did a lot of on the ground work in terms of making signs and flyers to distribute. And a couple people that have called the number have told us that's why they called it, was because they saw it on a sign in their neighborhood. And I think that's a big, really important thing. If you're thinking about creating a hotline, is that how is that number going to be, out in the community, and how can as many people see it as possible? Because obviously we have social media that we use to get that out there too, but that only has a certain amount of reach, so we want to make sure everyone has that number available to them. And I guess one example of work that's being done that I think has been helpful on the hotline so far is that we've had a couple cases where a landlord management company is doing something that's either illegal or very aggressive towards a tenant. We can have a member of the tenants union call that landlord or management company, and basically let them know that we are aware of the notice they put on someone's door, and that that we're monitoring the situation, we're working with their tenants. It's kind of essentially a show of force, and saying that we're here, we're fighting for these tenants, and we're watching what you're doing. A lot of times landlords think they can get away with a lot of things because they don't think anyone's going to hold them accountable to what they're doing. But if there's an actual public facing organization that has the potential to expose them and get information to their tenants, I think they're going to be a little bit less likely to do some of the really aggressive things that they do. But also the hotline, we haven't been able to utilize it yet for this purpose, but we can use the hotline to dispatch members who have signed up to help, to to take up physical space and block evictions from taking place. So that's something that we're definitely willing and able to do in cases where a tenant asks us to be at their apartment if they're dealing with, say, an illegal eviction. The landlord's trying to evict them, and we're prepared to do that. So that's just a little bit of info about our hotline and how we've been using it so far. And we're going to learn more throughout this process. So I hope this little bit of info is helpful if you're interested in creating a similar type of thing for your whatever your organization is.